video for how to run biochemical oxygen demand, also known as BOD. The methods demonstrated in this video are adapted from Standard Methods in Water and Wastewater 23rd edition. However, if your permit requires a different method, you should follow the methods as specified in your permits. According to Standard Methods, biochemical oxygen demand is an empirical test used to determine the relative oxygen requirements of any water, but is especially applied to the loading and efficiency of wastewater treatment plants. BOD measures both the aerobic degradation of organic matter and the chemical oxidation of inorganic material. BOD is measured by comparing the dissolved oxygen concentration water before and after a 5-day incubation period. BOD is affected by different factors including pH, temperature, the microorganisms present, available organic matter, organic and inorganic pollutants, and other factors. The equipment required to run the BOD test are a dissolved oxygen probe, a dissolved oxygen meter, 300 milliliter glass or plastic bottles with turtleneck opening, glass stoppers, plastic caps for the 300 milliliter bottles, a 20 Celsius incubator with no light, a glass or plastic carboy. Optional equipment is oxygen tank for aerating the water, fish tank bubbler for aerating the water. Dilution water. Dilution water must come from a deionizing system, reverse osmosis, or distillation system. You can use whichever source is available as long as there are no heavy metals, chlorine, or microbes. The other reagent is a nutrient pillow packet. Nutrient pillow packets can be ordered from chemical supply companies. The nutrient pillow packets we have here are made for 3 liter or 6 liters of dilution water. Preparing dilution water. Dilution water needs to be nutrient and microbial-free water and have enough oxygen present for microbial consumption. As long as you use one of the previously mentioned sources of water, the water should have few microorganisms or nutrients. There are a few different ways to ensure your dilution water has enough oxygen. We recommend filling your carboy with enough water to run your BOD test 1 to 3 days prior to your initial setup. You can aerate with a basic aeration pump. You can aerate with an oxygen tank. You can aerate with vigorous shaking. Nutrient pillow packets. After aerating the dilution water, add the nutrient pillow packets just prior to analysis. Add as many packets as needed based on the volume of water you are using. Once the packets have been added, cap the carboy and shake it vigorously for 10 to 30 seconds. We add nutrients to the dilution water as a food source for the bugs. Dissolved oxygen probe. There are lots of different brands of dissolved oxygen probes. Calibrate yours according to the instructions in the manufacturing manual. The probe we have here is a Hach brand LDO probe. Turn the meter on. Fill a 300 milliliter BOD bottle with a couple of inches of DI water. Plug the bottle with a stopper and shake vigorously for 30 seconds. This allows the air to become fully water saturated. Remove the stopper and quickly insert the tip of the probe into the bottle. Make sure that it is a firm and tight fit. Wait 10 minutes and then press calibrate on the meter. Sample preparation. Every sample needs to be run within 48 hours of collection and needs to be stored at 0 to 6 degrees Celsius. Each sample needs to be tested for the following. pH needs to be in the 6 to 8 range, but if it is not, it must be adjusted to 7.0 to 7.2. You may use 1 normal sulfuric acid or 1 normal sodium hydroxide to bring the pH into range. Residual chlorine needs to be checked for presence. Use sodium sulfite to remove any present residual chlorine. Temperature needs to be close to room temperature before taking the initial dissolved oxygen measurements. Room temperature is 20 degrees Celsius plus or minus 3 degrees. Bench sheets. Bench sheets for recording the information gained from BOD should contain these essential elements: the time, date, and calibration slope. Sample name, milliliters of sample used, milliliters of seed used. Initial and final dissolved oxygen concentrations. If the samples were seeded or not. Temperature. Seed. You use seed for samples that are not strong enough to deplete themselves. For example, a clean effluent is often not strong enough to deplete the dissolved oxygen enough, so you add a small amount of a high BOD source, such as the settled influent or mixed liquor. You will have to fine-tune your source seed and quantity. Commercially purchased seed is available, but you should use local sources if they are available. For the initial setup, start placing your bottles on the counter or in a BOD rack. Label the bottles if needed. Determine the seed amounts and the sample amounts for each bottle. Record all of this information on the bench sheet or in your LIMS system. For example, if you have a sample with a BOD history of 50 to 110 milligrams per liter, you will want to set up your samples so that they bracket these values. You will need more sample volume for cleaner waters, for example, effluent, and less sample volume for stronger samples, for example, influent or industrial samples. 2 to 5 dilutions should be set up for each sample. Initial BOD setup. At this point, add dilution water to each bottle so that they are all about 1/3 full. If the samples are carbonaceous BOD, add the nitrification inhibitor. BOD blanks. To create your blanks, fill a 300 milliliter bottle all the way up with dilution water. Each run requires at least one blank. Blanks are used to show that your dilution water has not been contaminated. Seed bottles. As discussed earlier, once you have determined your seed source, you will need to make 3 seed control bottles. We are using processed water from a wastewater treatment plant and adding 3, 6, and 9 milliliters of seed to our different seed control bottles. Glucose glutamic acid, known as GGA standard, is a universally accepted QC check standard for BOD. GGA standard can be purchased from a chemical supplier or can be made using dry reagents. You should have 3 bottles for GGA standard checks. Add 6 milliliters of the GGA standard to each GGA standard bottle. The blank, seed, and GGA check bottles are your 3 QC checks each time you run BOD. You are now ready to prepare your sample bottles. Use at least 3 dilutions per sample in order to ensure that at least one dilution has adequate dissolved oxygen depletion and enough residual dissolved oxygen. Add your samples to each BOD bottle according to what is on your bench sheet. Based on your history, you will need to fine-tune your volume of sample used. There are guides available online to help determine the volume of sample you should use. After adding all of your samples, you then add 1 to 5 milliliters of seed to each of your effluent sample bottles. This amount may be different depending on your seed strength, but the volume added should be the same for every single bottle in any given run. Top off each bottle with dilution water. Pour your dilution water slowly into the bottles up to the neck. Make sure not to overflow the bottle. Do this to all the bottles in order and place the bottles back into the BOD rack. Once all of the bottles are full up to the neck, you are ready to read out your initial DO. Remove the probe from its holding bottle and gently rinse it using DI water. Gently but firmly place the probe in the first blank bottle. Turn on the stirrer and hit the read button on the probe. Allow the probe to stabilize. Once it has stabilized, record the initial DO reading on your bench sheet or LIMS. Remove the probe and rinse it with DI water. Gently but firmly insert a glass stopper into the bottle and place the plastic cap securely on the top of the bottle. Do this for the remaining bottles. Make sure that you record the time of the readout on your bench sheet. Once all of the bottles have had their initial DO read out and were stoppered and capped, place them in a 20 degrees Celsius plus or minus 1 degree incubator. The samples will be stored for 5 days plus or minus 6 hours. Check the incubator temperature each day. If you do not have an incubator, place the samples in a dark room that has relatively consistent temperatures. Once the 5-day incubation period is up, calibrate your DO probe in the same way as you did during the initial DO readout. Record the incubator temperature, then pull out the BOD bottles from the incubator. Gently pull off the cap and stopper from your first blank bottle. Insert the DO probe without sloshing or splashing the water. Turn on the stirrer and hit read on the probe. After the probe is stabilized, record the final DO results on your BOD bench sheet or LIMS. Calculations and QC. To calculate BOD values, first you need to calculate your seed correction factor. This is determined by taking the initial DO, subtracting the final DO, and dividing by the number of milliliters of seed used in each bottle. Calculate for each seed bottle and average results to determine your final seed correction factor. To calculate BOD of your samples, take the initial DO, subtract the final DO, subtract your seed factor times the volume of seed added, if sample was seeded, and divide by the sample volume. In order to pass QC requirements, the final DO needs to be at least 1 milligram per liter, and samples must have been depleted by at least 2 milligrams per liter. Blank DO depletion may not be greater than 0.2 milligrams per liter. GGA recovery needs to be between 167.5 through 228.5 milligrams per liter. If multiple dilutions from the same sample pass the QC requirements, average the results to determine the final BOD values.